The war between the Sudanese army and paramilitary rapid support forces has led to many civilians being killed and misplaced from their homes. The fighting has triggered what the United Nations has described as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Critical infrastructure, such as that of electricity and water, has been destroyed. Civilians have no access to clean water and power. The UN Human Rights Team was in a mission in Sudan to assess the situation.
This is a country, as you know, that is at war. We spoke to a lot of people who shared stories that were just horrific. We spoke to women who had been gang raped and subject to sexual violence. And this was after they had been held under siege in El Fasher in Darfur for about 18 months, unable to consume food apart from animal feed and peanut shells. When they tried to flee El Fasher, it was on the road out that they were subject to further human rights violations, including sexual violence, seeing the men and boys separated from the women and girls, and the men shot or abducted for ransom, whereas the girls and women were subject to sexual violence. Their belongings were looted. Not only money and mobile phones, but also their papers, their identification papers, their educational qualifications were also taken from them. They then made the long journey up to Adaba, to the Al-Afad, the internally displaced camp, where we met them.
The UN Human Rights Office says that throughout the course of this conflict, all parties to it have perpetrated gross violations and abuses of international human rights law and serious violations of international humanitarian law. It has also raised concerns on the sexual violence against women and the trauma they are subjected to.
I had the privilege of being able to enter some of these areas where the women felt freer to share their experience, including their experience of sexual violence. Because as I'm sure you're aware, Ditaba, like in many communities, there's stigma associated with sexual violence. Now, the stigma should, of course, be attached to the perpetrator and not to the victim. But unfortunately, sometimes the victim is stigmatized. There are also women and girls who became pregnant as a result of the rape, and they need sexual and reproductive health services. The UN agencies that are in the camp and the local communities are doing what they can to help, but the funding shortfall overall and the underfunding of humanitarian aid needs for Sudan is a serious issue.
Ravina Shamdasani says that people in the tents are not getting enough humanitarian aid.
Not enough, not enough. In this camp, which, everyone's trying to do their best with, given the circumstances, but the camp is overcrowded. And in fact, it is now full. So they're trying to establish another camp to accommodate the new arrivals of IDPs. We saw informal settlements. In fact, we stayed in this small guest house, and just outside the guest house, there were tents set up, informal tents that were set up of newly arrived IDPs. Even in the camp that does exist, the number of latrines, for example, are not enough. I think there was one latrine for every 180 people, which is certainly not enough in these conditions. So no, the amount of humanitarian aid and assistance that's getting in is not enough.
A call to the world leaders to stop the war in Sudan and to those supplying weapons in this region to immediately end the provision of arms and ammunition.
Several messages to world leaders. Number one, the conflict needs to stop. And there are many parties, there are many actors in the international community that have the power to stop this conflict. Stop funding the conflict, stop funneling arms to the conflict, impose a countrywide arms embargo on Sudan, stop profiting from the conflict. There are countries that there are people within Sudan, the top generals to begin with, but also others who are profiting from this conflict. And there are people outside as well who are profiting and looting the natural resources of this country. All of this needs to stop right away.
Despite the trauma and displacement, Shamdasani says that people are still optimistic about their future. The UN Human Rights Office has again made a plea that human rights be central to building confidence and bringing this war to an end. Dita Botsotetsi, SABC News.